Scarface is one of my all-time favorite crime movies. Epstein, however, is not one of my all-time favorite child sex traffickers working for Israeli secret intelligence. In 1983, a movie called Scarface taught America everything it needed to know about how organized crime actually works. Tony Montana, played by Al Pacino with an accent that no Cuban has ever actually had, starts with nothing, builds a cocaine empire, buys a mansion, gets a tiger, acquires a comically large desk, and spends the middle act of the film doing two things: making ungodly amounts of money and not giving a single solitary damn about the law. The key to the whole operation is the bank. Tony needs a bank willing to process his money. He needs a financial institution that will look at duffel bags full of cash, ask zero questions, and convert blood money into legitimate wealth. In the movie, some anonymous Miami banker does this. Nobody remembers the banker's name because the movie wasn't about the banker. It was about the guy with the mountain of cocaine and the little friend. In real life, the banker is the whole story. Because in real life, the banker was JPMorgan Chase, the largest financial institution in the United States, and the Tony Montana was Jeffrey Epstein, and the cocaine was children, and the duffel bags were 55 separate bank accounts processing over $1.1 billion in transactions over 15 years. And unlike Scarface, which ends with Tony Montana getting shot in a fountain because that's what happens to criminals in movies, the real version ends with the bank paying a fine smaller than its annual catering budget. The CEO testifying he'd never heard of the guy, and everyone going back to work on Monday. In 2012, a senior executive sent her an email joking that a client's home had fewer nymphets than Epstein's. This email exists in federal court records. A senior executive at the largest bank on the planet made a joke about their client's access to underage girls, sent it to the woman who managed the division that handled his accounts, and nobody blinked. In the movie, Tony Montana's banker would have gone to prison. In real life, she's in line for a promotion. Her name is Mary Erdoes. She runs JPMorgan's Asset and Wealth Management division. The rape of children was office humor. Tony Montana had one rule: don't get high on your own supply. Keep it professional, keep it cold. Move the product, take the money, don't ask questions. JPMorgan couldn't even manage that. They were emailing each other nymphet jokes about the kids like it was fantasy football trash talk. The bank wasn't just moving the money, they were enjoying it. The execs in charge of his money were probably also his customers. 55 accounts, $1.1 billion processed. Payments to over 20 named victims, most of them children. Over $600,000 processed to a girl that the bank's own internal files noted Epstein had purchased at age 14. They wrote the word purchased about a 14-year-old girl, like she was inventory, like she was a pallet of office supplies, in their own records, in their own building. And then they kept processing his transactions because the money was too good and the girl was too powerless for anyone to give a damn. Here is what JPMorgan Chase's own records show, and I want you to picture the duffel bag scene from Scarface while you read this, except replace the cocaine with trafficked kids. Tony Montana bought a tiger. Epstein bought a 14-year-old. The bank that processed the purchase kept doing business with him for another decade. At least when Tony stuffed cash into the bank had the excuse that it didn't know where the money came from. JPMorgan knew. They wrote it down. They filed it. They joked about it in emails. And they kept going. A lawyer for the U.S. Virgin Islands did some math during a court hearing that I wish I could scrub from my brain. She took the $9 million in transfers to girls and women from Epstein's accounts, divided it by the few $100s he typically paid per encounter, and arrived at a number: over 20,000 rapes facilitated by JPMorgan Chase. 20,000. Her exact words: JPMorgan was a full-service bank for Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking. Full service, like a car wash, except for the systematic rape of children. In Scarface, Tony Montana's operation gets taken down because a snitch talks, and the DEA closes in. In real life, JP Morgan's own compliance department was the snitch, and the executives told the snitch to shut up. Compliance officers flagged Epstein's accounts for what they were: the financial backbone of a child rape operation. They did this repeatedly, over years. Their job was to catch exactly this kind of thing, and they caught it, and they reported it, and every single time, senior management buried it because the money mattered more than the children. JP Morgan eventually sued Staley, demanding 8 years of compensation back, roughly $80 million, which sounds like accountability right up until you realize that suing your own former employee is what you do, instead of admitting that the entire institution was complicit. Jess Staley, the executive who managed Epstein's accounts, personally made sure the child rapist's money kept flowing through the bank. He later left JP Morgan and became CEO of Barclays, because in the real-world version of Scarface, the guys who help the drug lord don't get arrested, they get headhunted. At least one other executive has testified, also under oath, that Epstein's accounts were discussed with Diamond. Somebody lied in federal court. Nobody has been charged with perjury. And it isn't just the bank covering for him. The US government has been covering for Epstein this entire time. The DOJ gave him a sweetheart plea deal in 2008 that should have ended careers. The FBI sat on evidence for years. The Treasury received suspicious activity flags from JP Morgan as early as 2002 and did nothing. No investigation, no follow-up, no phone call, nothing. Then there's Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, and the man who would be Tony Montana if Tony Montana had gone to business school and learned to keep his mouth shut. Dimon testified under oath that he had never heard the name Jeffrey Epstein before 2019. 15 years of accounts, 55 of them, over $1 billion. Compliance officers screaming that the bank was processing money for a child rapist. Executives emailing nymphet jokes about the children being raped. And the CEO of the bank never heard the name. We are governed by organized crime that traffics children the way the cartels traffic drugs. And the only difference between the two operations is that the cartel doesn't have a seat on the Federal Reserve. The bank filed a suspicious activity report with the Treasury Department, flagging over $1 billion in Epstein transactions as related to human trafficking. $1 billion in child rape money. They filed this after Epstein was arrested and after he was dead. 16 years of children being raped. 16 years of compliance officers waving flags that got shoved back into drawers. And then once the guy was in a body bag, they finally did the paperwork. The USVI lawyer called it a CYA reporting after 16 years. In Scarface, Tony Montana gets shot in the chest and falls into a fountain, and the camera pulls back and shows you the statue that says, "The world is yours." At JP Morgan, they didn't even need the fountain. The world was already theirs, and it still is. In Scarface, when Tony Montana lies to Sosa, Sosa sends a hit squad. In real life, when the CEO of America's largest bank potentially lies under oath about processing $1 billion for a man who raped children, he gets a bonus, and the government that was supposed to stop all of it looks the other way, because half of them were probably on the client list. Now here's the question nobody in the financial press wants to ask, which is why I'm asking it. How much money was Epstein generating for JP Morgan that the largest bank in America was willing to risk federal prison to keep the relationship alive? He was the concierge of the billionaire class. His introduction fee was, "Don't ask what I do with the kids." He wasn't just a client. He was the golden goose, and the golden eggs were covered in the blood of children that nobody wanted to look at too closely. Compliance screaming human trafficking and executives overruling them doesn't happen for a guy with a savings bond and a checking account. That happens when the money is so massive and so connected to so many other massive piles of money that shutting it off would pull threads the bank cannot afford to have pulled. Unsealed court documents show Epstein helped JP Morgan recruit ultra-high net worth clients, including, according to internal emails, Google founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Because Epstein didn't need $1 billion banking infrastructure to rape children by himself. He needed it because the operation was industrial scale.
20,000 rapes. Flight logs full of the most powerful names on the planet. An island with a temple on it. A ranch in New Mexico with 6 underground levels that nobody has ever adequately explained. This was not one man's perversion. This was a service industry for the ruling class. Rich men raped children and JPMorgan Chase handled the billing. And the bank that processed the payments is still open for business tomorrow morning. And the woman who received the Nymphet email is being fitted for the CEO's chair. And the man who says he never heard Epstein's name is still running the show.
Which brings us to the real question, the one that should keep you up at night. How many of the most powerful people on the planet were raping children for the last 20 years and aren't in prison because the people who would need to prosecute them were on the same flights, at the same parties, on the same island, doing the same things to the same kids?
So, what was the punishment for all of this? $290 million to victims, $75 million to the U.S. Virgin Islands, $365 million total. JPMorgan Chase has paid between $38 and $40 billion in fines for other crimes under Diamond's leadership. The Epstein settlement is less than 1% of their total fine history. Less than a rounding error. Less than what Diamond's couch cushions eat in a fiscal quarter. In Scarface, Tony Montana dies face down in a fountain. At JPMorgan Chase, they paid a fine that amounts to roughly what it costs to cater the annual shareholders meeting, and nobody even had to update their LinkedIn. In the real version, the bad guy rapes children for 2 decades, sells access to them to the most powerful men on earth. The bank processes every dollar of it. The compliance department gets silenced. The executives get promoted. The CEO says he's never heard of the guy. The fine is less than 1% of their historical penalties, and the only person who supposedly dies is the client, in a jail cell, under circumstances that roughly 0% of the American public believes were a suicide.
There are 2 versions of Scarface. In the movie version, crime doesn't pay. The bad guy dies. The empire crumbles. The audience goes home feeling like justice exists, even if it's violent and ugly.
Tony Montana at least had the decency to go down shooting. These people don't even have the decency to stop smiling.
Personally, I don't think he died at all. I think his buddy in the White House got him out, because that's what powerful friends do for the people who know where all the bodies are buried. And Epstein knew where every single one of them was. But that's my opinion. What isn't my opinion is everything else in this article. The world is yours. Unless you're 14 and Jeffrey Epstein just purchased you. Then the world belongs to JPMorgan Chase, and they're not giving it back. And the cost of everything that happened to you is a line item in their quarterly report that nobody will ever read.